All right, a very special conversation lined up for you. We have Ajay Rajadhyaksha, who is the global chairman of research at Barclays. And he's here, in fact, physically at our studios. Ajay, great having you to give us a perspective at an opportune time with regard to what's happening in global geopolitics and how that could likely influence markets in 2026. Let me first start off with the latest with regard to Venezuela. You have a front row seat to everything that's playing out over there. Talk to us about what this means and how realistic is this sort of synergy which President Trump is trying to build up with regard to Venezuela.
It doesn't mean as much as the initial headlines suggest at a global macro level. For Venezuela specific assets, it matters hugely. So Venezuelan bonds have basically returned 100% over the last 12 months. They've returned 40% over the last 2 weeks. So that part is true. But it is a one-off. You realize the regime's not changing.
Right.
This is just a way to get the regime to, and you know, the president of the United States has made such statements, aggressive statements before, and if it is doable, he'll do it. But oftentimes he moves on. For example, for weeks and weeks, months and months, the United States was very upset at Brazil because they were going after the former Bolsonaro. If Bolsonaro goes to jail, we are going to impose A, B, and C. Well, it happened, and the US moved on. You know, so there's an element of bombast here. You're not. One question that I keep getting asked constantly is, well, is there a read-through in this for China? If so, Venezuela matters. If the Chinese take it to say, well, the US is saying, you do your thing in your hemisphere, we will do ours in our hemisphere. We won't mess around with you if you go after Taiwan. Well, that's a very big deal. But honestly, that's just a huge step. That's just a step too far. The reason why there's not been an outbreak in China, Taiwan, is not because the Chinese are saying, oh, we were just waiting for the US to do something that breaks the rules-based order. No.
Okay, so lots is happening on the geopolitical front. Ever since we've heard the tariff announcement last year, even after that, we've had so many new developments. Talk to us about the relevance of tariffs anymore in the global order, what kind of impact they could have, because we still have no clarity on the India-US trade deal, but both economies seem to be doing just well.
You're absolutely right about that. And the impact is going to fade even further going forward. Okay. The big surprise last year was how little tariffs mattered in the world's largest economy, despite the United States arguably picking fights with another, virtually every other major economy, all at the same time. And the big reason for that was, it boils down to 2 letters, AI. So if you're General Electric, if you're General Motors, right, and you see uneven trade policy, and your closest distributor suppliers are right across the border in Mexico and Canada, the fear is that you, GE, say, look, I was about to build a new plant, but I don't know what the hell is happening. I'm going to wait. And General Motors says they will also wait. And Intel says, and if enough companies do that, then that starts to become a real macro issue. In this case, turns out I do not care what GE is doing, with all due respect to GE. When Google casually comes out and says, I'm going to spend $100 billion on AI capex this year, and there's 5 other names where Google came from. The United States is in the early to middle stages of the single biggest industrial investment cycle since the Second World War. That includes the telecom build-out of the late 90s, early 2000s. Now, when it comes to India, remember, what for both the US and India, what is being impacted, no matter how wide a lens you take, is just the goods economy. Tariffs are on goods, not on services. Sure. The vast majority of both economies, more so the United States than India, but even India, is increasingly a services economy. And you break down the numbers, right? Last year, India exported a little over $70 billion to the United States. If you look through the details, about half of that ends up having 50% tariffs. So on 35 to 40 billion, you have an extra 15 to 20 billion. Even if the currency doesn't take some of the brunt, which it has. Even if it doesn't, what is called the just pay it cost. Just pay the damn thing. 50% extra on 40 billion is an extra 20 billion. For a $4.5 trillion economy, that doesn't matter.
Sure. I understand. And you said that US is in the early stages of the next industrial revolution, and that's going to be in AI. And given that the subject is AI, do you believe that the revolution is going to come in faster and is going to hit jobs, people as well as economies harder, if at all there is an impact?
Definitely harder than previous cycles. And this is a bit of a nuanced answer, so give me a little time to answer it. We have had very big technology changes before. So for example, right, the internal combustion engine was arguably, electricity was a bigger game changer at that point than AI is, believe it or not, right? It immediately lengthened the working day, made so many things possible, right? But historically, you have needed, for a game-changing technology, you've needed a silver bullet for adoption at a widespread level. What I mean by that is 1885 to 1900, 5,000 cars are sold in the United States. 1900 to 1915, 20 million are sold.
Correct.
You know what happened in the year 1900? The car starter was invented. It was a small technology relative to the combustion engine. Anyone seen those black and white movies of propellers for cars? You know, it sounded cool. It was a really bad way to start a car, right? So that changed, and suddenly adoption exploded. Electricity. Downtown Manhattan was electrified in the 1880s. Took 45 years for a country to be fully electrified because it needed someone after Thomas Alva Edison to come up with the idea of stringing wires across tree lines to electrify the suburbs. This time around, you do not need a silver bullet. Your phone is something you grew up with. It just does far more magical things, you know. So that's part of the reason why adoption is going to be much quicker. But it will take, at an economy-wide level, it usually takes a little longer than people realize. There's this concept in economics, not to bore you guys, but Robert Solow won a Nobel Prize for economics. No one remembers that. Everyone remembers one statement he made called Solow's paradox, which was in 1987 he said, I see the personal computer revolution everywhere except in the productivity numbers. He was right. 7 years after he made that statement, the United States takes a one-time unexplained jump in, you know, it just takes time to hit critical mass. It'll happen quicker this time, but it's not this business cycle. It's not, look guys, I'm happy if I get the next 3 months right. Let's be clear about that. So I don't think it's the next 4 quarters where you get the US growing at 4% instead of 2. That's not happening.
So then when? How's the timeline looking?
Gun to my head, I think, okay, so some benefits, and in some parts of the economy, they are happening as we speak. So what do you call operational leverage is showing up for the technology sector. Like the US tech sector is in many ways the tip of the AI spear, right?
Sure.
You told an entire generation of Indian Americans, learn coding. Now turns out Google does 40% of its coding through machines, and that's only going to go up, right?
Yeah.
So the big 6, big 7, part of the reason they are just such astonishing profit engines, and they are just amazing profit. This is not a valuation negative in any means, is partly because now operational leverage is kicking in. First in IT, in tech, then it'll probably start in financial services, insurance, etc. But to your initial question, when at an economy-wide level, I think we probably see it in about 3 years or so. I spent some time with Stan Druckenmiller, who for my money is arguably at this point he has a better track record than Buffett, right?
Sure.
And this is one man's opinion, but it's Stan. And he said, look, I'm telling you, in 5 years' time, out of the 70 million knowledge workers in the United States, 10 million will not be needed. It's not as far away as you think. It is going to become a social issue at some point.
So that's on AI, and like you said, US is spearheading the AI environment. But where does India stack up in this? Because India, as an IT provider, is more of a solutions provider,
It is.
more than an innovator on the AI front. How do you think India is going to start adopting AI, and then what could the timeline be for India?
So the opportunity set for India is not in the picks and shovels phase. So right now we are in the picks and shovels phase, right? We are in the phase where you have a massive build out of compute and inference on the other side, right? Processing power.
Correct.
It is a bipolar world. The Europeans are non-existent. India is really doesn't. It's basically between the United States and China.
Yes.
That's it.
Sure.
Okay. But virtually every technology which changed the face of a modern economy in past cycles, the ultimate winners were those who came up with better use cases for a technology. So what I mean by that is take refrigeration. Turns out the winner, it prevented things from spoiling, right? It was a game changer when
Correct.
it first happened. Turns out the winners of refrigeration were none of the refrigeration firms. It was a company that doesn't come to mind immediately when you think about it, Coca-Cola. Ever had a hot Coke? It's not fun.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, and so that technology comes out and it leads to, so that's where India's opportunity set lies, where you start to go after the use cases in one industry after another aggressively, and hope that you are at least first among equals.
The global economy, despite everything that's playing out, geopolitics, AI, and otherwise, seems remarkably resilient. It's a world which has the uncertainty has gone up manyfold.
Yeah.
But markets are at all-time highs.
Yeah.
Economies are doing very well.
Yeah.
Central banks are comfortable to cut. What are the risks here?
I'll preface this by saying my world has been completely turned on its head. I grew up as a global macro analyst, right? I would talk about labor markets, central banks, inflation, currency pass-through, yada, yada, yada. And now I spend all my freaking time on whether TPUs can replace GPU. I mean, but just because it has become such a big macro issue. There are two risks that I would point out right now. One is a traditional macro risk, which is long-end bonds in developed economies. So the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Japan are the four worst in the sense that they have three things in common. They all have very large debt loads. Emerging economies don't. Emerging economies have handled this cycle really well. They don't have dollar liabilities. Not everyone has $750 billion in FX reserves like India does, but they all have healthy FX. They've done well this cycle, okay?
Sure.
On the other hand, the West is spending money like drunken sailors on shore leave, okay? So go back to these four economies, right? They all have large debt loads as a starting point. Their deficits are growing much quicker than nominal GDP in most cases. Like France, for example, the nominal economy is growing at below 1.5% and the deficit is running at 5%. That doesn't work.
Correct.
But most importantly, none of these countries have shown any political will to do any fiscal consolidation, to take any hard decision. The risk is at some point, the long end of bond markets starts to rebel. And if I had to pick one country that I worry about more than the others, it's probably Japan, just because the policy rate is still super low.
Yeah.
The all-in debt levels are still higher than virtually everywhere else. And for the first time, they do have inflation.
Sure.
If 30 and 40-year Japanese yields start to go up another 50 to 100 basis points, take an example, right? So Japanese investors hold $1.2 trillion in non-yen bonds, okay?
Right.
They have $1.2 trillion in non-yen assets. They have zero in non-yen liabilities, not a single dollar of liabilities. The reason that they do this is because over the last 30 years, the Bank of Japan kept yields so low that they pushed them out into another bond market.
Sure.
But now, if you are sitting in Marunouchi, in Otemachi, you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute. For the first time in my local market, which is where my risks, my exposures lie, I'm getting reasonable yield. What am I even doing? You know, the hope is that it happens incrementally, but there is some risk that it happens in a disjointed fashion. So that's the traditional macro risk. The other comes on from the AI side. So AI capex supported business investment last year, but AI equities also supported consumption. Let's not forget that, all right? You keep hearing about a K-shaped economy. The US is a K-shaped economy. The lower end of the K is struggling. We used to use the phrase housing is the business cycle. Well, housing has sucked for 3.5, that's a technical term, has sucked for 3.5 straight years, right? And the United States has still not lost a single construction job, because turns out, even if you're not building houses as a general contractor, some skills are fungible. If you're building 10 data centers, each a quarter of the size of Manhattan, you do need roofers, you do need framers, you do need building contractors, right? So that economy has supported the old economy more than people realize. If that hits a wall, then it's actually a global problem. I don't think it will, but those are the two risks.
And then a quick follow-up to that. The AI problem in 3 to 4 years, which will cause unemployment to roughly 15% of the US employed population, is what you spoke about. Is that going to accentuate the debt problem, if at all?
So it's a fair question. I do want to level set the numbers. So there are 165 million people employed in the country. 70 million are knowledge workers.
Okay.
So the 10 million,
I get
even
your
if that number ends up being true, right, is 10 million or 165.
I just extrapolated
Right.
the number, but yeah,
Right.
sure. I take your point.
Historically, we've always found eventually, and the word eventually matters here, we always found new jobs. So in 1900, 70% of the United States was engaged in agriculture. Now 2% is. But the other 68% are working.
Sure.
Right? When the horse and buggy system went bust because of the car,
Yeah.
you had industries that exist for 1,000 years. You had stables across the country. You had an army of people who swept horse dung of the city streets, right? They all were jobless, but they went to work in factories. They went to work in building roads. You had garages, right? New job occupations came up. But eventually, there is transitional friction. There's no question about it. And it is, I don't think you get actually a debt problem, because presumably the reason, it's not that economic activity isn't happening. It's just that there is a magic black box which does it instead of 10 million people.
Sure.
Right? The economic activity continues.
Correct. Yes.
You will have more redistribution though, and I think you will have social issues. I mean, I'm a little surprised that governments, especially in the developed world, are not spending more time. Because you need a reason to wake up in the morning, right? Even if you are getting subsidized by the government, right? It's not healthy to not have a. Presumably, hopefully, it doesn't come to that, but we'll see.
Okay, so very interesting conversation. Ajay, thank you so much for your time. Due to paucity of time, we're going to have to end this conversation here. But great insights, and thanks so much once again
Thank
for
you.
your time.
Cheers.
Okay, viewers, with that, we'll wrap up this edition of First Trades.